Hey everyone, welcome back to Human Powered. I'm Jen Rubin, and I'm here with my former colleague and friend, Jessica.
Hi, Jen. Great to be here again.
Yeah, so, for people who are just tuning in for the first time to this podcast, one of the things that we've been doing and are excited to do is sitting down and talking with people who we think are doing some of the crucial work of strengthening democracy, right? The people who are kind of like the civic health heroes in their communities that have found ways to connect with folks across difference or to build stronger networks, but doing it through the arts and through the humanities. And that's really kind of what Wisconsin Humanities has always been about. That's what the grant programs have funded the people doing this kind of work. And so, we're taking this moment in time where that Wisconsin Humanities, has lost a lot of federal funding. And in this moment, we're continuing those conversations. And so we're trying to bring to you who some of those people are that are doing this work and what we can all learn from them and how we can, use what they've learned from their work to continue to build in our own communities. So we're pretty excited about who we have today to sort of elevate sort of these conversations a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. We're talking to Mary Beth Collins, who has more of a bird's eye view of how this work is happening all around the state. She is an expert in legal and community engagement, as well as nonprofit sector work, and is going to talk to us about all the ways that she's seeing what's happening in Wisconsin, what's happening in the country, and what's happening globally. But she's from Wisconsin. She's a La Crosse native, and it's a really fun conversation.
Yeah, so hope you enjoy it.
Well, hey, Mary Beth, it's great to see you here on this Zoom. Jen and I have been pretty excited to talk to you because small town Madison, of course, we know you through various different connections and sort of concentric circles. But we're pretty excited here to talk about what you're doing, what you're up to in the real world. So, how do you introduce yourself to people? Tell us what you're up to.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here with both of you, Jessica and Jen, two people who I consider civic health heroes, which will be relevant to our discussion today, but also just great friends in the community. The way that I usually introduce myself in professional settings these days is that I say that I'm the executive director of the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's a university-based center that does teaching, research, and outreach related to civil society and the nonprofit sector and community efforts. All the work we do is community engaged, meaning we bring university resources and expertise to work in collaboration with partners that are usually the ones driving our project-based work, that are doing the work out in community. And my background is as a teacher, an attorney, and an executive. And I bring all three of those professional backgrounds to the work that I do at the center.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff for us to dig into in this conversation, but I kind of want to ground it first in like how grounded you are in Wisconsin. Because I've known you for a while, our kids were super good friends. Our girls still are. I've had a chance to spend time with you in La Crosse, where your family's from, and where you're related to a good percentage of the town, as far as I could tell. Um, and got to spend time on the Mississippi with your parents. And I was so taken with your dad and how engaged he is that he was one of my first Love Wisconsin stories. And I think the
Mhm.
title of his story was like, "We were raised to be good Wisconsinites or great Wisconsinites," or something like that.
Yeah.
And I just know how much this like sense of civicness and love of Wisconsin sort of shapes the work you do, even as you go out around the
Mhm.
state, around the country, around the world.
Yeah.
So just if you could kind of share some of that with us, like kind of how that resonates for you as a kid and how you bring it into your work.
Yeah, and this is a really good time to be asking and answering that question because I honestly feel like even maybe 2 years ago, I wouldn't have as much clarity around it, but I've been really reflecting on this a lot. So, a few things I'll share. Both of my parents were born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and all of their parents were born within like a 30-mile radius of that. I grew up in La Crosse with an enormous extended family in an era of the 80s and 90s when life in La Crosse, at least for our family, felt like it didn't require that much intention or thought. We enjoyed the things that we enjoyed. My parents did good work. We got together for holidays and birthdays. We went to public schools. We played public school sports. We played instruments in the middle school band. There was a lot of ability from my perspective, in retrospect, for a family to live in that town and simply engage with the existing infrastructure. And I'm sure there were people that had it harder than us and struggled with things. But it feels very different to me than it feels in the United States, in middle America now. My grandfather, who had 12 children, was a union railroad worker, and he was able to raise a family humbly, but nonetheless, like, raise a family with 12 children on a well-paid railroad job for his entire life. So there were a lot of inputs happening for me as a young person that told me, like, this is sort of what means to live in a Wisconsin community. There were limitations to that life in La Crosse. I didn't experience a lot of the diversity that I've since been able to experience as an adult, since I left La Crosse as a 18-year-old. And we knew in the 80s and 90s growing up there that we were missing out on things. And so I, like many other people, set off on an adventure as soon as I possibly could to get out of there and experience things. I did that, but I quickly, as an adult, realized how precious La Crosse, the natural beauty of the Mississippi River, the community that I grew up in. I'm really passionate about it. I also think in the time that I've been an adult professional, we've seen Wisconsin go through a lot of challenges to some of those notions that were part of my kind of basic understanding of what it meant to live in a Wisconsin community, that you voted, you trusted your institutions, you felt like most of the people in your community were having a pretty similar experience to you. You wanted your kids to go to strong schools, and you all showed up when they played a basketball game, and that was sort of what life was like. That started to feel very, very different to me and many other Wisconsinites, I would say, in the 2000s. We suddenly saw a lot of changes that, suddenly looking around at our Wisconsin and saying, wow, like, people are feeling very different about some of the issues that I thought we agreed on. And it doesn't feel very friendly. The civic debate, suddenly it felt very divisive. And so it's been interesting being a Wisconsinite going through that, because now in 2025, I will just share that some of the things that I learned and was steeped in as a young person in Wisconsin, but then also going through that experience of watching those things be challenged in ways that we weren't really expecting, has been very informative to my work well beyond Wisconsin's. I personally feel that I'm experiencing right now a really hopeful observation that Wisconsinites want to go back to a place where we can be together in community and have those basic infrastructural pieces to live well, for everyone to be able to participate. So I'm excited about being a champion of that Wisconsin tradition that I grew up in and that has been challenged in my life, but I feel very passionate about it. And I didn't know that was going to happen. I honestly thought as an 18-year-old, I might leave and never come back or something. And now it is one of the forces that drives my work, and it keeps me very passionate.
Well, thank you. That leads to a question that I was hoping I could ask you, and that, you know, there's a lot of talk now. Maybe it is because we're here in Wisconsin, but I hear it. Wisconsin Humanities, as well as the organization I now work for, talk about wanting to find common ground and working to find common ground, and was really sort of incubating those nodes of civic space that exist. Maybe it's a supper club or a library, but in some ways it's rhetoric, right? You hear those words a lot, but you're out there. What are you seeing that are real examples that are actually working, that we should all know are working, so that we can build on them?
One of the things that I find really exciting about Wisconsin today, and even across the country, is that there's this beautiful kaleidoscope of local initiatives and groups of people that are finding continuations of forms of civic engagement that might have existed in previous generations, And there are examples of very new approaches. And even in La Crosse, my hometown, I've seen extremely exciting examples of this. So you might still have the Rotary Club that meets in the way that it always has, but you also have like Leaders Igniting Transformation, a group that brings leadership training and organizing to students of color in the high schools there, also, doing work and helping to organize Juneteenth in La Crosse. And so there's an array of organizing that occurs on sometimes an organizational level, like we have a name of our organization and we're a 501c3 or whatever. But it also takes shape sometimes in more the basic social capital joining ways that people um, have been doing in the United States, and that can look more recreational. The joining piece and the getting together piece, even when it's more social, that can contribute. And I'm seeing people right now, I feel like there's a little bit of a renaissance of that. People are sort of wanting to come back to that, especially after 5 years of a pandemic where people felt very separated. But it's that sort of social desire to get together and do things like book clubs and knitting clubs and join things and connect and go to music festivals in the summer. All of those things matter, but also there are very intentional organizations all across Wisconsin that are organizing around such an array of needs in our communities. So we see organizations addressing like the aging population in isolation in different communities. We see organizations looking at advocacy for certain issues, for certain groups. We see people working on environmental issues. We see mutual aid type things bubbling up through the pandemic and through some of the natural disasters that we've experienced. I mean, I could go on for hours about this, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's been a lot of concern about the decline of social capital. And yet, from my work, I see such a beautiful array of organizing and sort of initiatives that are happening across rural and urban communities and micropolitan communities in Wisconsin. Some of them are more statewide and official, and some of them are very local. And some of them really reflect the beautiful sort of modern version of Wisconsin that I think does include a lot more voices and stakeholders than perhaps in the days that my grandparents were growing up here. And I see that as a point of strength for Wisconsin.
One thing you said earlier, you mentioned the word hope, right? Which is like a word that I think a lot of us are like, where do we find hope? Should we be finding hope right now? And I think the three of us through Jessica through the grant program of Wisconsin Humanities, me through Love Wisconsin, you with your work, I think we get to see like, county by county, city, village level, like the people who are just doing whatever it is that they're into and they're digging in locally and they're doing really impactful work, whether it's connected to a public institution or whether it's not. But I think, through your center, you're getting to work a little bit more with organizations. And
Mhm.
so I think you mentioned somewhere maybe in Ashland or something. It's like I think it's always useful for people to like sort of get into an example, like, of like what does this actually look like. So could you share, I think you've done some work with folks there.
Yeah, we have a project with UW Extension in Ashland County with our Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies, working in partnership. And we called the project The New North. And it was an exploration of the Shawamagan Bay area, which is Ashland and many surrounding communities up on that beautiful North Shore on Lake Superior there. And the idea was it sort of incubated from some colleagues that we had up there, which actually two of the sort of founding visionaries of this project were working at Northland College. And so that's an interesting side note to just mention, because that is an entire anchor institution of that area that has closed since this project was incubated. It relates to the point of the project, though. We didn't know that was going to happen in Northland, but the questions of the project that they wanted to look at were, hey, we think there might be changes happening in this region of Wisconsin during the pandemic. Across the United States, there was a phenomenon of people sort of making dramatic moves during the pandemic. Like, well, I'm working remote anyway. Why don't I go be in the middle of the woods or whatever? And so there was a thought that, that there were probably a lot of new residents settling in that area. And combined with questions that pre-existed the pandemic about the economic opportunities in that area, the future of that area, this raised some new questions of like, well, how are new residents getting involved? Are they getting involved with civil society organizations? Are they being welcomed by the veteran community members? Are they contributing to the economy? Like, what does this really look like? Or is, I guess the worst case scenario would sort of be like you'd have a bunch of people come in and they wouldn't be engaged. And so we did a small investigation of like who are the new residents. We did that through some surveying. And then we sort of asked them, are you getting involved and how are you getting involved? But then we also added this component that is very Wisconsin that I personally loved a lot, which is we also talked to what we call like third space stewards. So folks that are running the church congregations, the taverns and restaurants. We had folks participate in our focus groups that were running like the gaming store in downtown Ashland, like the bike shop in downtown Ashland, to be able to ask them, all right, you get this amazing bird's eye view of what's going on, like through your bricks and mortar. And we know how important these spaces are, where people connect and combine across difference, and that goes outside of their work and their household. And so when we talked to all of those folks, the takeaways that we got that I think are really compelling are that there are incredible traditional organizations, even anchor institutions up there like a healthcare system and UW Extension, that are doing really deliberate work about connecting community and creating community assets to support a strong, healthy region. There are also organizations that people don't always think of, like churches and like businesses, that are actually doing really intentional work to connect community. So the bike shop was hosting like a weekly potluck in the winter to get people that would otherwise connect over bike rides together to just build community. And then in some of the really smaller town pockets where we talk to people, there were some incredible advocates that are doing things like running the business district of a Main Street town that has like maybe 5 or 6 businesses running in it. But they're like totally renovating the park to make it more of a destination. There are people running weekly newspapers up there that go out by mail to people with news. So that's an example where we're certainly not the experts from our center in Madison on this, but I felt like we were able to provide some skills to this project and then really let the UW Extension folks on the ground there be in the lead. One idea that came of it, just to give a concrete example, was that there could be an opportunity to like connect across the small towns up there with like one listing of events and activities and create more of a destination feel. So like, oh, you might want to consider driving into the smaller town on Wednesday nights when they do their like event in the park. And the other thing that we heard from the new residents, there was a very consistent piece of feedback that they want to do more. So that was a really helpful understanding that like it's not really a risk that new residents are moving there and want to just like shut their doors and windows and be online and not participate. No, that wasn't what we heard. But what we did hear is should they have more opportunities to get involved and they can find those easily, they would be even more involved. And so this is a takeaway that I think could apply to many communities, which is that people want to connect. And I'm seeing that post-pandemic, like in a very organic way everywhere I go. And if we can make it easy for them to know where to show up and that they are indeed invited and welcome, and it's not like a closed, insular sort of thing, I think we have a lot of opportunity to grow that.
One of the things, as you were talking, I was thinking that is so useful about being sort of like, in some ways, like a statewide clearinghouse, maybe. I do think, Jessica and I sort of, we talk about this, with all the guests we have, everyone's hungry for connection, particularly if we can figure out how to do it across difference in some way. And there's all these like little subcultures that are doing it, out of a bike shop, or maybe it's like, the yo-yo club or whatever it is, like people are finding their way. And then to see that actually it's not just us doing it here, this is happening everywhere. There's people trying to like figure out how to build outside of institutions. I don't know, I just feel like we're hearing so much about how the opposite's happening. And so
Yeah.
I think to be a clearinghouse, to be like, yeah, you're doing this here in this one pocket of state, but it's happening everywhere. You're part of a thing that's happening,
Mhm.
which I find useful, in my low
Yeah.
moments, to feel like I'm part of a thing that's trying to happen.
Yeah. And I mean, if I can riff on that for just one second. So, one of the things our center does is work on this Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative. And this is sort of just, we kind of administratively support this network-based coalition of organizations. Some of them that are in the steering level of it are statewide organizations, nonpartisan statewide organizations. But then we try to do this inventory of a network of all of the local organizations that in some sort of nonpartisan way are doing something that contributes to civic health. And I'll be happy to share the definition of civic health that we use. But what you said, Jen, reminds me of a shift that I've experienced and made in some of the recent work that I do with civic health, because I tend to be the person that goes out and presents on it. We have data and we have information, and sometimes groups will say hey, will you come share with us about this theme? And I used to present on it and just sort of provide information. What do we know about it? What does Robert Putnam say about it? What did Martin Luther King say about it? And what do we see in terms of the metrics of Wisconsin? And what are we going to try to do about it? That was sort of the last, the just previous phase of how I would present on it. Now, when I present on it, I actually talk about it as join the movement. Because what I see is that, to your point, there actually are a lot of places and entry points and really motivated, beautiful people that you all have seen through your humanities lens that are civic health heroes in communities. And often they have some link to some kind of a node, whether that's a bowling league or, an advocacy group or an Elks Club, that create space where people can get together and connect and heal these divides and wounds that we've experienced as a society. And it sounds kind of quaint. And when I was presenting on this in early 2025, people would call me out on are you kidding me? This sounds like you're suggesting that we should bake a pie in the face of, complete degradation of democracy. And I always try to, balance that and say, well, a couple of things. I mean, we need that fabric to be able to function, to uphold democracy. It's not just the meta, the macro, big players or big movements that affect our survival in this endeavor to have a representative democracy. We need the fabric. There's lots of science and social science about that I could refer to. And also, those elements of having those connections in communities are also a protective element when things other systems might be breaking, right? And we need that too. So if we don't get the bailout when the flooding happens in our community from FEMA or from whatever system is supposed to serve us, and I'm not saying that's happening, I'm just giving an example, the person that knows you next door that might check on you matters a lot, right?
Yeah.
So those things all, to me, make the case that this localized, sort of granular, individual action, collective action in communities on a local level, while it shouldn't replace our work that we might do to advocate for something we care about on the national level, is very important. And what I always say is that if everybody does what they can in a sustainable way on that localized level in their individual lives, we can really rely on a network theory approach that can support us. And the biggest risk is that we get so overwhelmed that we completely disengage. And we know that because of social media and the decline of local media, which is something I like to talk about when I talk about these themes, there's this over privileging of national level news and information in our daily consumption. So it's very easy to feel what the hell am I supposed to do about this crazy government shutdown? That, I can't do anything about that. And that's the thing that I'm worrying about and stressing about, and I can't sleep at night about, right? Well, that's a very different experience than what you might do in alternative reality too, which is understand what's happening with the Mind Project in your community, and who your elected person is, and you can show up at a community meeting and you can read about it and know something and have some agency. And people's connection to their local issues is getting overwhelmed by these big national stories, which look very divisive, very toxic, very insurmountable. But we can regain that sense of agency in local settings by connecting, by having a role in organizations. And I think for the sort of psyche of participating in democracy, that's going to be a really important step. some of the, you know, elements that have brought us to this point are very global, very universal.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, to maybe like bring us back to where we, started in this conversation is, you just have this kind of unique vantage point where you really kind of have a sense of what is happening in nonprofits around the state. Funding is going away for a lot of them. You're able to see how some of them are preparing. So maybe if you could just kind of take us to that, like what you see around the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's double whammy of the pandemic, which already created a phase just 5 years ago where nonprofits were facing existential challenges, to the current moment where in my career of working in this sector, I've never seen people say on the national level, we're going to start investigating nonprofit organizations and revoking their tax exemption. I've never seen that. And in my research and work, we often have talked about that phenomenon as something that occurs in the global setting. So you talk about like 10 years ago, I would go to conferences and people would be like, yes, we're going to examine the way that these like bordering on authoritarian governments or restrictive governments are trying to close the sector. They're trying to limit civil society organizations because civil society organizations are where people can organize to resist things and to connect with each other and keep power in a non-state capacity, right? I've never seen that argument and that thing that I teach students about be like a thing that we're talking about in real terms in the United States, really, in the same way. So it is important to say, while there are historic antecedents and examples, and while, organizations and people working in these organizations have always had to be skillful through those very challenging circumstances and just the day-to-day hustle of running nonprofit organizations, which is like a whole other topic. This is a very acute moment. And so what we saw is during the pandemic, a lot of organizations had to do different kinds of scenario planning because if you relied at all on admissions or fundraising events or in-person programming, your activities and your revenue were probably very challenged, which was a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations did incredible work to adjust and help communities that were in need during the pandemic in those early days in ways that just underscored for me the way that this is the nimble and creative sector that will like be our last stop when everything else is not working. And we now see these like threats to things that people work on, like you can't, like if you have federal funding, you can't talk about race, gender things. And a lot of times nonprofits programming is about serving communities that have specific challenges. And so that's often an explicit part of the way they describe their work. So between like disruptions to funding, this ripple effect of executive orders that may or may not be legal, but suggested that doing programming around um, stated populations and things was sort of like off the table. A lot of organizations are experiencing some aspect of this. And then there's the whole question of um, what will happen with federal funding, which actually we're in a government shutdown right now, which is going to start really affecting communities that we serve in the nonprofit sector. But the reality is we really don't know right now exactly what's going to happen with like the next budget whenever that comes. But the other irony of this is that while nonprofits feel threatened and that their funding might be in jeopardy or the way they do their work might be in jeopardy, the additional concern is that communities that they serve are going to have higher needs. Nonprofits are trying to understand anticipated impacts. They are trying to do scenario planning if they had any reliance on federal funding. And there are not great solutions. And we know that, like, if, for example, all of the federal funding that has been distributed to nonprofits in partnership to effectuate congressionally appropriated programs, it's very important to me that we talk about it that way because these are not handouts for nonprofits. This is partnering with nonprofits to effectuate congressionally appropriated programs when we talk about federal funding. But if that funding goes away, there is not enough endowed philanthropic funding in the world to make up for it. So there's no reality where like we keep things at the certain level because we find the money from somewhere else. I would say the takeaway that I have from what I'm seeing with all of these factors together is that there are just such incredible, dedicated, devoted, skillful, creative people in these organizations that are like not going to give up. And that does not mean that we should sit back and be like, they'll figure it out. We should support them. We should find ways to support organizations that we know are going to be doing some of this critical work.
Thank you. I mean, that is how some of the ways that Jen and I have worked with you is through collaboration with nonprofits like Wisconsin Humanities. So thank you. Well, Mary Beth, can you give us an example of something that you've done recently here in Wisconsin that really filled your cup and made you feel like not just a Wisconsinite, but like, oh, I'm myself again?
Yeah. Well, lots of them, and I won't share them all, but one example that I'll point out from my summer that was really inspiring to me was going back to Summerfest, which I usually do every year. And that event is just really special to me because they bring in all different genres of music across all the different stages. And so what that results in is a scene where people from all different backgrounds, all different generations, all different tastes are in one place. And it can be a bit chaotic, but it's such a rare event because it's not like a self-sorting event. It's actually like an unsorting event. It's bringing everybody that has any interest in music of any type, a community event or a big festival of any type, a sort of like inflection point of the summer together. And it was beautiful this year to see that and just wander around from the country stage to the hip hop stage to the old school stage to the rock stage and just see who showed up, and especially to see this new generation of like 18 to 20 year olds or 16 to 20 year olds that I saw that were probably having some of their first independent experiences going to something like that after a global pandemic, especially, and seeing them, in the mix with also like the baby boomer classic rock people. It was great.
That sounds great.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, what fun. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending your morning with us.
Oh my
This has
gosh, it
been
was an honor. I would just like really want to end on the note of encouraging anyone that hears this to consider how they can be even more civically healthy. I expect people that listen to this are probably already pretty involved and doing a lot of the things that we would recommend, but spreading the good word of why being civically healthy matters for us individually, for our local communities, and for our country, Wisconsin, and the world. I want everybody to be a part of this movement. And there's some really simple, basic life things that we can do, civic health habits, I call them, which you can find on our website, to really move the needle individually and collectively.
Thank you. We'll definitely put a link to that civic health habits document in the show notes. Thank you so much. Well, Jen, that was a really inspiring way to spend our morning. I think you and I both were really excited to talk to Mary Beth because it's helpful to get that big picture and understand what, how a center like the Center for Nonprofit Studies is important in our state, and how that kind of research makes a difference for us all to better understand the reality of what's going on.
The center that Mary Beth runs does, such good work and has really great resources. So we're going to link to both the center. We're going to link to the Civic Health Report, which I think is coming out soon. And we'll also put a link to the Love Wisconsin story about her dad. The reason why I was so excited to tell a story about her dad is I spent a day with them on the Mississippi where he sort of narrated like the working class history of the buildings. He narrated like every little dip and turn of the Mississippi. And so it's a fun story. So we'll put that in the link as well.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Human Powered. Subscribe, share with your friends, and thanks for being here.